Today we're going to talk about the theory of demand. Demand is obviously one of the fundamental foundational concepts of microeconomics, so we'll spend a little bit of time with this to make sure that we get it right. Let's start off with a couple of questions. Me personally, Mr. McLaughlin, I don't have any demand for a Malibu mansion. Why is that true? Take a second and think about it, and think about why I don't have demand for a Malibu mansion. Well, the reason I don't have a demand for a Malibu mansion is simply because I don't really have the ability to buy a mansion in Malibu. They're millions of dollars at least, and I don't have that kind of money at my disposal. So for demand to exist, we have to have what we call buyer ability. And this simply talks about you have the money, the means to do it. Well, I also don't have demand for mayonnaise. Well, why is that? Clearly I can afford mayonnaise, but I think it's a disgusting substance and I never ever want to eat it. Don't like it at all. In fact, when I wrote this out, I spelled it wrong. That's how badly I hate it. Okay? So the second part of that is, even though I can buy mayonnaise, I have to want to buy mayonnaise. If you don't have both of those, then you don't have demand. When we look at demand, we're looking at a fundamental relationship between price, the price of a product. That's going to really relate to the ability, because of course I would want a Malibu mansion, right? But I can't afford to buy it at the price that they're sold for. So it's the relationship between price and the quantity that is demanded. When we talk about supply, it's the same exact idea, except then it's the quantity supplied. So what we're studying in this is we're looking at consumer behavior if. Don't think about the other side, we're only going to think about consumers. If Malibu mansions were really cheap, if Ferraris are really cheap, whatever, if that was true, how much would consumers want? We don't want to think about the price they're actually selling at. That's supply, and that's the whole other side. Keep in mind when we're talking about this that we are looking at the market, and you'll need to check the previous video for a quick talk about what the market is, or exactly what it is that we're studying in microeconomics. So it's really useful in this. We'll make what we call a price schedule, and this is basically a listing of prices and how many are demanded at each price. We'll start off by just talking about an individual. We'll talk about me, because I like to talk about me. This is going to be a price schedule for shoes. I like shoes, I like to buy nice shoes, and our price here is going to be listed in Rand. So, in Rand, and 2,000 Rand is probably the equivalent of, well, the Rand's been going crazy lately, but it's probably about 180 bucks. Well, if this is yearly, I might buy, for that price, maybe one pair of nice shoes every year. That's pretty expensive, and I'm probably not very interested in spending that much money on shoes, even though I like shoes. So I'm able to, and I do have a need for it, but I wouldn't do too many. Well, what about if the same pair of shoes, you'll see down here in the definition that this is always, we're using the ceteris paribus assumption. It's not a different pair of shoes, it's the same exact pair of shoes. Remember, ceteris paribus means all other things being equal. So, ceteris paribus, if the price falls, what's going to happen to the amount I demand? Well, clearly I would buy more. How many more? It doesn't really matter. Let's just say that it's going to be 3. Okay? And if the price falls again to even less, maybe it's going to be 10. And if the price falls all the way down to 100 Rand, about $8 US, maybe I buy a new pair of shoes every week and just throw them away because they're so cheap. So maybe I'm going to buy 50. So what we see in this is that as the price went down, the quantity demanded went up. Now that's an important phrase or an important term we need to learn. When I talk about demand as a whole, we're talking about this entire relationship between price and quantity. When I'm talking about quantity, singular, demanded, and we always abbreviate this QD, then I'm talking about at a single price, what is the demand? So when the price is 2,000, the quantity demanded is 1. When the price is 1,000, the quantity demanded is 3. So the law of demand states that as price decreases, quantity demanded increases and vice versa. Notice the logic would be the exact same if we had started at 100 and gone up, except instead of quantity demanded increasing, of course, it decreases. In economics, we do have laws. Now, we have to be a little careful with these because there are exceptions to our various laws. And remember, this goes back to something we spoke of before, that people do weird things. People don't always do the exact same thing every time, and that's some of the fun or more interesting things that we look at. Why do those exceptions exist? So, nonetheless, we do call them laws because most of the time they're going to hold true, and then we can build a logical conclusion from those laws. So we say that price and quantity, this relationship that we study, is an inverse relationship, meaning that when one goes down, the other one goes up. If one goes up, the other one goes down. So they do the opposite of each other. Okay, a few other things to talk about here. Well, an individual demand schedule, which is what we're looking at here, isn't really very useful. It's probably better to think about a market demand schedule, and what we're going to do is we're going to take all the individuals inside of the market, combine them together, and we get the same idea, but you notice the prices are a little bit different because there's some people out there who would pay 10,000 Rand for shoes. Not me, I would never pay that much. But some people within the market that I live in certainly would and do. Also, of course, the quantities are going to be much different because we're not just talking about one person, but we're talking about, maybe a few 100,000 people. Now that brings up an interesting point. How big is the market? Well, it depends. If you're talking about the market for milk, well, you're probably not going to drive very far to find different types of milk. You're probably just going to go to the nearest store and buy whatever milk you buy. You're probably not going to drive all the way, 50 kilometers or 30 miles away to get a different type of milk or even to get, a lower price on milk. Especially the price would be a little bit silly because the amount of money you would spend getting there is probably going to be more than the amount you would save. Now you might do it based on your buyer desire. Maybe I really want this specific type of organic milk that I can only find in one spot, and because that's really important to me, I'm going to go ahead and do that, even though it's going to cost me a little bit more money to do. So it's important that we think about the product itself that we're studying. Remember, in microeconomics, we only look at one product. It's important that we think about the one product that we're studying and how that might change the size of a market. For a big purchase like a car, you're very likely to drive quite a ways away to find the exact car that you want, or to find a better price on the car that you want. Okay, we represent this idea on the demand curve. And the demand curve, it's going to be the representation of demand, notice big D demand, so all the demand, in one market. It shows the same idea. We see that it's negatively sloped, and that shows us the inverse relationship that we spoke about a second ago. So here what we're going to be looking at is Uber rides in 4 ways, and this is daily. If you don't know what Uber is, it's like a taxi alternative. You dial them up on your phone and they come get you. Now a couple things on this. Notice I had to clarify the time frame of the market. We're talking about every day. It could be weekly, it could be monthly or yearly. In this case, I just chose to make it daily. Over here, I did specify that this is in Rand, especially if you're using a currency that isn't the dollar. The dollar seems to be what most people use as their examples. It's probably a good idea to clarify, in all cases, what currency it is that you're using. If you live in South Africa and are talking to South Africans, you probably don't need to clarify. Likewise, if you're living in England and you're talking to British people, well, you probably just assume that you're talking about the pound. Also, we need to clarify what our quantity is. So this is going to be kilometers. So we're saying that it's 10 Rand for every kilometer. And if the price per kilometer is 10 Rand, then 1,000 kilometers will be demanded. Okay? When we set up the diagram, just a couple of nuts and bolts, we want to make sure that price is here. You don't have to write it out as long as you've written out, given a title to your diagram, and then quantity goes on the x-axis. Now, this is going to make some of you uncomfortable. Even though price is on the y-axis, it is the independent variable. It's what we make our changes to. Talk to your math teacher. There's no law that that the independent variable goes on the x-axis. It's just how they tend to do it in sciences and the math. Again, we do it differently in economics. That's fine. I don't really have a good reason why we do it differently, but this is how we do it. So, whenever you talk about explaining your logic, we're going to talk about because price changed, quantity demanded increased or decreased. So that always needs to come first as you present your argument. So when we look at a change in price, so when we go from 10 to 5, what we talk about is a movement along the existing demand curve. The price-quantity relationship in this case hasn't changed, we're just exploring it. So what we see with arrow A here, we've gone from that point to that point, and the reason that happened is that I lowered the price from 10 to 5, A, and that increased the quantity demanded from 1,000 to 1,400 kilometers. So that's again just back to our law of demand. The same is true if I increase price. If I go from 10 to 15, and notice here with my arrows, I called them all B so it was clear which one I was talking about. So when I increase price, again the law of demand says that quantity demanded will decrease. So I move along the existing demand curve, and what that means is that as price went up, quantity demanded decreased from 1,000 to 600. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave a comment below.